So I was called by a CEO of a biomedical company, and in fact, I was in India at that time on a book tour, and I got a call from a CEO, and he said, you did strategy at FedEx, and I have some questions about our strategy. So can you come and talk to me? And so I said, sure, when I get back. So when I got back, we set up a time and talked to him. And he said, uh, I just presented this strategy. Their corporate office is in London. This is a global company. And they have a manufacturing plant in Memphis where they make these knee implant and hip implant and other biomedical. So he gave me a copy of the McKinsey report. McKinsey had done their strategy and he presented to the board. And he said, I have this question, what if Medicare, which is the reimbursement arm for the government for the medical healthcare, because most of the implant take, the seniors, they replace their knees or their hips. And if government changes the reimbursement, that changes our whole revenue stream. What do we do? So I said, Larry, I don't have a fixed answer. I could learn about your industry and come up with, but what I'll do is let me talk to your team and see where they are. And it is more of a process because the strategy at FedEx, when we presented to Fred, it wasn't just 3 years out what we should do, but we had a whole list of what if questions we would ask ourselves and answer. What if China grows 5%? What if India grows? What if US GDP grows? What would it look like and what should we do? Excuse me. So I went around and I talked to all of his senior VPs. Uh, and so I talked to marketing and talked to sales, talked to manufacturing, talked to R&D, talked to warehousing. Excuse me. To make a long story short, so what I found is that everybody had their perspective on, what is critical. Of course, the goal, everybody knew that we need to grow. For the company need to grow and gain market share. So marketing would say, we are growing 15% and we can grow 20%. If manufacturing would not put our orders on back order, if we can supply on time, we can get, bigger market share. And then I went to manufacturing and find out what their issues were. So what I found out is that you could call it a collaboration because it required all the departments working together to grow the company. But the incentive systems were different. So manufacturing had the incentive program, and I don't want to get into engineering, a concept called earned hours. Earned hours is an industrial engineering concept which says that you earn hours based on how many pieces you produce. So like a standard rate, maybe you produce 100 pieces per hour. But if you can make 120, then you get 1.2 hours. And you get your bonus based on how many earned hours. Because you were supposed to work 8 hours, but you earn 9 hours, so you get 9 hours worth of pay. So what that requires is that in manufacturing, the longer or more bigger size order I produce, because every time I change setup, it takes time. If I set up from screw A, implant B to C. So my incentive is I want to produce large orders, whereas marketing is saying, hey, I need this product B, C, or D. So I went around, then I went back to Larry, the CEO, and I said, we got an issue. We need collaboration across divisions, department, but the incentive systems are not encouraging that. So, so that's just one example. So what that says is if you look at a corporate collaborative standpoint, then there needs to be a focus on that everybody understand that the focus is on the customer. Go ahead, Eamon.
Yeah. So if I just hark this back to the construct of any organization, as you pointed out, they consist of different departments, and each department is optimizing for something. And what you're saying is, as they optimize for something, it could be competing for optimizing of another department.
It
And
is
this,
sub-optimizing the overall. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's the way it is constructed, and it will always be the case. You will optimize some things, and it will sub-optimize something else. That would remain as a constant. What would really change if this is taken home?
See, what would change is, so at FedEx, because I saw it, so FedEx, everybody understood that for a package to be delivered in the morning every day, the plane has to fly on time from Mumbai to Memphis. Then we have to sort it. Then people have to deliver in New York, So everybody understood that every night we have to collaborate, because the results were there next morning. So everybody knew in the company what happened last night. That did the plane go on time? So it was easier at FedEx to see because every morning Fred Smith would get a report, what was the service level yesterday, and you would get a call. So we were very clear on the total process. So that is number one, that everybody understanding that it is the total process instead of focusing on my process, that I understand what it takes. Then the number two is a continuous reinforcement. So every paycheck I got, and this is, I'm talking in 79, FedEx was starting, and every paycheck I got every 2 weeks, when I opened the envelope, it would say, a satisfied customer made it possible. A satisfied customer made this paycheck. So the focus was on the customer. So that is the role of senior leadership and management, to continually make them aware. Yes, you have your process, you have department, but until all of us are working together, at the end of the day, unless the customer gets it on time, whatever he's ordering, our job is not done. Then what FedEx would do, so like my department designed all the hubs around the world, all the airports around the world. So Memphis hub is the biggest hub in the system. About 200 airplanes come every night. So the performance for the Memphis hub was, they know they have to get the planes on time, so they arrive in New York or Chicago on time. So they were not just looking at that their plane left on time, but they were measured upon, did the New York deliver packages on time? So the manager who is responsible for the New York flight in the Memphis hub, every morning he calls his counterpart and say, hey, what happened in the delivery to the customer?
So, in the example that you cited, I think it's absolutely crystal clear that the overarching organization goal is then broken down to department goals, and even if they're in conflict, they have to ensure that the organization goal is achieved in some
Yeah,
sense.
and if people understand, that's the key thing. If people understand that, that is the key. I can do my job, but for the company as a whole, so I need to be aware, how am I impacting, and constant communication with the other department. And it
So,
is an ongoing reinforcement.
so going back to the example you were sharing about this implant company, where exactly did you see the dilemma or the gap, the big gap that you saw after you interacted with the VPs?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the big gap, there were several gaps, but this big one between manufacturing, because they produce, and then of course distribution supply. So if you can supply on time, so the big gap was the incentive system finances put up. Because yes, it makes sense. If you just look at manufacturing, that if they can produce more than the standard, the time study defines, industrial engineering, most manufacturing have that. And that was part of my summer job in Chicago. I was setting standards for a manufacturing company in Chicago. So that makes sense. But then it was interfering, because human nature is such that, even if I am the VP or senior VP, my compensation drives my behavior. And if my compensation drives this. So the one thing, the FedEx took care of that compensation, even at my level as a managing director level, which I had this group. 50% of my compensation was not my salary. It was what we call variable compensation, which was based on these three indices: people, service, profit. People is my leadership index, and service is the corporate service. Not that I got the hub design in time and delivered, and then profit certainly, the earning per share. So then I knew that my compensation. So then I'll be careful. So these are things which companies need to think about collaboration.
Yeah. So what I hear you say is, if I were to just state it differently, you're saying aligning incentive or incentive misalignment disorder is what this organization was suffering from.
Exactly. And that was one. And the second was, so, if you want to talk about this one, if you want to take the another one at the department level, I could talk about that. So the another issue was that, so once you get into the understanding that in the implant business, okay, the surgeons, so surgeon time is very valuable, because they are getting paid how many surgeries they do. So when you are replacing a knee, so knee, they do take an X-ray before you go for your surgery, and they see what size knee you need, because everybody needs a different size knee, and they manufacture all these sizes. But so before they are doing surgery, there is a setup. There is a thing, sort of a structure they set up on your knee to keep it straight, and that takes time. Okay, so let's say that takes 10 minutes, 15 minutes, okay, setup time. So now if you, so the surgery time is, actually doing the surgery, replacing the knee, but this prep time. So if you can reduce the total time to surgery, you got an advantage over competition. So so once you mention to the R&D folks, says, yes, we got the knee, but can we come up with a better contraption, for pre-surgery, so we can reduce the setup time? So making them aware, so then they can focus on, yeah, this is critical. They would not realize that, because they, like engineers, they are working on their product and they take pride in their thing. So the key is in collaboration is making everybody aware what is our total business process, and how do we make money, and how do we gain our competitive edge.
Interesting, interesting. What I also heard you say was, or maybe there is a curiosity actually coming up. So on one side, there is this alignment of incentives that the board, the leadership can work towards. And then you figure out a mechanism to optimize various departments' goals. But you still end up having the following. The following being, there is, as you mentioned, collaboration is two-step or a two circle function. One is the inter-department, the other is the intra-department. But within the departments, there is both competition also, intra-department competition and inter-department competition. In your experience, what things could really be helpful to drive this collaboration, given that there is so much of inherent competition intra and inter departments?
Well, as I mentioned in the FedEx example, so it wasn't just my compensation, which was substantial at the senior management level, but every hourly employees, they would get twice a year bonus at Christmas time, then other time. And they knew very clearly that their bonus was tied also into the company profitability and service level. So everybody understand that what I do, so I need to be aware of how it impacts the guys after me. And then I talk to the guys before me, say, guys, if you can do this thing differently, then I can do, you know, faster or better or quality job. So continually, if everybody is aware, again, it comes down to, what is in, and everybody takes pride. But if everybody is aware that really our job is not done until the customer at the end of the day, as Fred would say, unless the customer is satisfied. And then not just he's satisfied, which is a good thing to do, but if my compensation is tied into it. So it is changing the culture and the psychology, which, and certainly, as you mentioned, it is human nature. You would, always want to take a shortcut and do things and say, I did my job. So that's where the leadership comes in on an ongoing basis. saying, yes, we did our job, but let's talk to Department B and see what we can do together to make it better.
Yeah. One last question on this particular case that you shared. The question is that I'm actually reminded of two different thinkers who are coming at this from maybe the same angle or maybe using a different vocabulary. One is Daniel Pink and the other is Margaret Heffernan. Now, Daniel Pink, in one of his successful RSA talk, he mentions that if you want to get people to do things, if they're very simple, if there are defined processes, there is repetitiveness, incentives work well because you have clarity of what is the effort, what is the outcome, and what am I going to get from it. But the moment you turn things into a complex environment, things that are very complex that requires interdepartment and so many nuts and bolts, I mean, in metaphorical terms, to be tweaked and experimented. Now that those are the places where direct incentives may or may not work. You need things which are slightly different. And the same thing is echoed by Margaret Heffernan, who talks about the social capital amongst community, including within the organization. If an organization has a very high social capital, they rely and bank on the social capital, even in absence of explicit, incentives and orders and processes. Any thoughts that you have on these?
Well, and I can decide the practical example that, so the very first thing you would do at FedEx, and that's, so when I developed these model for my books, I just went back to my experience at FedEx as to how did it stay number one. So anytime a new product introduction would come or a new idea, any department would have, from engineering, like tracking or marketing, immediately the first thing would be cross-functional teams. So that would the very first thing. Every department would be asked to nominate a person to work on this new product team. So, so part of the culture was that you get together, and then your job was to understand and give your input, not just to the team, but to come back and share with your department as to what company is thinking. So let's just take my example. So we were developing 3 and 5 year plans. What LA would look like, what Mumbai would look like, what Bangkok would look like. So I made it a point that once a quarter, I would go to my peer staff meetings in LA or Bangkok or Singapore and share with them what we are thinking, 3 years out. Because it is not just designing the airport, but we are also reconfiguring the operations. How the customs would clear in Tokyo, what would happen. So it is in those conversations, they would have a chance to input saying, but and this is what happens in Mumbai customs or in Tokyo and there. So when you guys are looking at the airport, every minute counts because what we are selling is time. So it is creating that culture, that of communications, and that you certainly you understand at your level that is critical. But by just understanding, it is the processes. So as I mentioned, it is a people process. It is the people who come up with the idea, and any idea you have impacts 5 other departments. So several times I run into my consulting and other companies is that people did not just have the skill set to get people on board, to collaborate with them.